Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every person's life where they feel the tightness, an invisible yet undeniable pressure, not from the outside world, but from within. A sense that the role they are playing, no matter how respected or secure, no longer reflects the full depth of who they truly are. You were never meant to be defined by a title, a label, or a temporary role. These roles, be it a job, a relationship status, a societal function, are useful only as tools. But tools are not the craftsman, and roles are not the self. The danger arises when you start confusing who you are with what you do. Over time, you might begin to shrink your own sense of identity to fit into the small container of that role, running through the park. You play it so well that you forget it was just a performance, not the entirety of your being. This is how potential withers, not because it's absent, but because it's ignored. There is a vast space inside you that remains unexplored when your days become repetitions of limited functions. It's not that these roles are inherently wrong. It's that they are not enough to contain all of you. Think of your spirit as water. It can flow into any shape, any container, but it is never limited by them. Just because you pour it into a cup does not mean that it becomes the cup. Yet, many people live their lives thinking they are the shape of the cup they've been given. And in doing so, they forget the ocean within. When you start to sense that inner discomfort, when you begin to feel uninspired, restless, or out of alignment, it is not a sign of failure. It is a signal of growth. It is your inner self knocking from the inside, saying, "You've stayed here too long." Just like a tree cannot remain in a small pot forever, you too must recognize when it is time to be replanted into a larger field. The soil may be familiar, but growth requires space. Your current role might have been perfect for your former self, but if you've grown, and you likely have, it is now time to ask, is this still serving my evolution? Expanding beyond a role does not mean destroying it. It means becoming larger than it. It means approaching it with fresh awareness, infusing it with depth, and no longer mistaking it for your full capacity. Running through the park, you can continue in the same place and yet function at an entirely different level of consciousness. You might still be called by the same name. The presence you carry becomes different. This presence is what reveals that your identity is not confined to any one role. It is fluid, vast, and sacred. So, begin to observe how you speak about yourself. Listen closely to how you define your days. Are you expressing the totality of who you are, or just surviving in the small script handed to you by others? You have the power to rewrite the narrative, not with rebellion or drama, but with silent strength and clarity. The world may not change your role, but you can outgrow it gracefully. That is how the true self begins to emerge, not suddenly, with stillness, purpose, and quiet revolution. The greatest limitations are often not the ones imposed by society, but the ones we place upon ourselves. When you look closely, most of the boundaries that cage your growth are invisible, woven from threads of habit, comfort, and fear. These self-imposed limitations are not enforced by chains or locks. They exist in the mind, quietly convincing you that who you are right now is all you can ever be. They convince you that the comfort of repetition is safer than the uncertainty of expansion. But the truth is, comfort is not always a sign of peace. Sometimes it is a disguise worn by stagnation. When you repeat the same thoughts, emotions, and behaviors day after day, a pattern begins to form. The brain, in its efficiency, builds habits out of these patterns, creating neurological paths that become difficult to break. You stop questioning, stop exploring, and slowly stop evolving. This is how potential becomes buried under routines that no longer serve, and identities that were never fully yours. What was once a choice becomes a trap, and you remain within it, not because you are weak, but because you have forgotten that the key to freedom lies within. You must be willing to see your current limitations not as truth, but as boundaries you have unknowingly accepted. Ask yourself, who told you that this is all you're capable of? Running through the park, who decided the limits of your expression, your power, your voice? And more importantly, why did you believe them? The moment you question your limitations is the moment they begin to dissolve. But it takes awareness and it takes courage, because stepping beyond what is familiar often brings discomfort. And yet, growth never happens within the comfort zone. It begins just outside of it. The seed must break through the shell. The bird must leave the nest. You too must outgrow the version of yourself that is content with playing small. That version served its purpose, but now it only survives by convincing you to stay silent, stay hidden, and stay the same. But your true self is not interested in survival. It seeks expansion. It calls you to live a life not dictated by fear, but led by purpose. Every time you resist your own growth, you deny the world the gift of your full presence. You become a smaller version of yourself, not because the world demands it, because you've learned to expect less from your own spirit. It's time to unlearn that. It's time to reclaim the vastness within. Begin by identifying where you've settled and ask yourself if staying there still aligns with your highest potential. Let your awareness be the light that reveals the walls you didn't even know you built. Then walk through them, not with haste, but with quiet determination. The role may remain the same, but the person playing it has changed. And that is how the self rises, one boundary at a time, broken from within. The routines we follow, the titles we carry, and the tasks we repeat daily can slowly become masks. Masks we forget we are wearing. Over time, these masks begin to feel like our actual face. We confuse the repetition of identity with the truth of identity. We think that because we wake up every day to perform a certain role, that role must be who we are. But in reality, these patterns are layers constructed by necessity, survival, and sometimes by the expectations of others. The danger lies in never removing the mask to check whether it still fits the shape of your evolving spirit. Every role comes with a script. You're expected to act, speak, and think in a certain way. At first, you may step into the role with purpose, believing it serves you or contributes to something greater. But as time passes, the role often becomes routine. The energy once felt begins to fade. You do the same things, talk to the same people, follow the same schedule, but something inside begins to shift. You feel distant from your own life, as if you're playing a character written by someone else. That disconnect is not failure, it is awakening. It is your inner self beginning to notice that the role no longer reflects your depth. Like an actor on stage, you may hit your cues and say your lines perfectly, but somewhere behind the scenes, the real you is waiting to step forward. And the longer the mask is worn, the heavier it becomes. It doesn't just cover your face, it begins to cover your voice, your intuition, your truth. That is how the true self becomes silenced, not because it is weak, but because it is buried under repetition. But masks, no matter how long worn, can be removed, and the first step is awareness. You must learn to observe when you are acting and when you are truly being. Are your words aligned with your thoughts? Are your actions aligned with your values? Or have you become so familiar with the mask that you no longer question its presence? To remove the mask is to sit with yourself in stillness and ask, what part of me have I hidden in order to fit this role? It is an honest, sometimes uncomfortable question. But behind that discomfort lies liberation. Because once the mask is removed, you realize that who you are is infinitely more dynamic than any role you have ever played. The world may still see you in that same role. You will move through it with new energy, not confined by the limits of routine, but expanded by the power of awareness. Your steps will carry more weight, your words more clarity, your presence more authenticity. And this quiet transformation will not need to be announced. It will simply be felt. Because the true self, once uncovered, does not need to shout. It simply lives, free, whole, and no longer masked. A role can be fixed, defined, and externally assigned. The self is fluid, ever evolving, and limitless. This is where the tension begins. The role may remain stagnant, but you do not. Within you exists the capacity to grow, to deepen, to expand. But when you allow the role to set the boundaries for who you can be, you deny your own evolution. The mistake many make is trying to shrink their vast internal world to fit into the narrow framework of the role they occupy. But what if the opposite was possible? What if, instead of molding yourself to the role, you allowed your inner growth to reshape how the role is experienced? External labels are convenient. They give others an easy way to understand you. They simplify identity into a single word: teacher, student, employee, mother, leader. No label can ever capture the complexity of your inner life. Essence of who you are is not something that can be written on a business card or confined to a job description. And yet, when those labels become your primary sense of identity, you begin to accept their limitations as your own. The shift must come from within. You do not need the world to offer you a different title. What you need is to stop identifying so deeply with the one you've already been given. You can carry the same responsibilities, live in the same environment, interact with the same people, and still experience life from a higher level of being. That's the power of internal expansion. It is not dependent on circumstance. It is a choice to grow inwardly regardless of what changes or doesn't change on the outside. Imagine a candle in a dark room. The room remains the same size, but the light it emits grows stronger, reaching every corner. That is how internal growth works. You become more conscious, more aware, more present. You listen more deeply, respond more mindfully, and exist more fully. Suddenly, the same role begins to feel different, not because it changed, but because you did. This is where meaning is rediscovered. When you bring your full self into every moment, the task becomes sacred, conversation becomes intentional, and the smallest detail becomes an opportunity to express depth. You stop seeing your role as a limitation and begin to see it as a vehicle, a platform for conscious expression rather than a box for containment. Don't wait for the world to offer you a promotion, a new title, or a bigger stage. Your expansion does not require permission, only requires presence. Show up fully. Bring more awareness to each moment. Infuse depth where others see routine. And most importantly, remember that your inner being will always outgrow any label the world gives you. Let your growth be so profound that the role can no longer define you. It can only follow the light that you now carry. There is a voice inside you that doesn't care for titles, status, or recognition. It speaks not in words, but in a quiet pull. A feeling, a longing for something more, not more possessions or praise, but more alignment, more truth, more connection to the essence of who you are. This is your inner calling. It doesn't rise from the noise of the outer world. It arises in moments of silence when all distractions fade and you are left with yourself. And in that stillness, a realization begins to form. The path you are on may be safe, even successful, but it is not the path that leads to your full becoming. The world celebrates outer approval. It praises achievement, applause, and recognition. These things are not wrong. They are simply external. But when they become the measure of your worth, running through the park, you slowly lose touch with the deeper compass within. You begin to make choices not from truth, but from strategy. Park. You act not from inner necessity, but from outer expectation. In doing so, you may gain approval, but you risk losing authenticity. And authenticity, once lost, dims the spirit. It cannot be replaced by applause. It can only be restored through reconnection. To follow your inner calling is not always convenient. It often means walking a path others do not see. It means doing what feels right, not what looks right. The calling may ask you to slow down when the world urges you to rush. It may lead you to say no when everyone expects a yes. And in those moments, you will feel the tension between who the world wants you to be and who your soul is asking you to become. That tension is not a problem. It is the pressure that creates clarity. You must ask yourself, am I making this choice to be seen or to be true? Is this action aligned with my spirit or simply a reaction to external demand? The answers will not always be easy, but they will always be honest. And honesty is the first step toward freedom. The power of the inner calling lies in its ability to guide without force. It doesn't demand attention. It invites you to listen through the park. And once you do, you'll notice that even in the smallest decisions, what you say, how you act, park, where you give your time, you begin to move differently, with intention, with integrity, with a sense of purpose that doesn't fade when the crowd walks away. When your life is led by inner alignment rather than outer approval, you become unshakable. You are no longer tossed by praise or criticism. You are centered, grounded. You know who you are and where you're going because someone told you, but because you listened and remembered. Your true self is not interested in performance. It is not here to impress. It is here to express. To live with clarity, depth, and meaning is the gift of following your calling. Not a louder life, but a truer one. The structures that surround your life, roles, routines, responsibilities, often give the illusion of stability. They offer form, predictability, and a sense of identity. But what begins as helpful structure can quickly become a limiting frame. Like a picture trapped in a small wooden border, your true self may find its expansion restricted by boundaries that no longer serve its growth. The human spirit was never meant to be confined to a single image, a single title, or a single path. You were designed to evolve, to adapt, to continuously shed old layers and expand beyond previous versions of yourself. To do this, you must learn how to break the frame through the park. Breaking the frame does not mean destroying your life or rejecting your responsibilities. It means no longer allowing them to define the limits of your consciousness. The frame is not physical, it is internal. It is the set of beliefs through the park, assumptions and self-perceptions that keep you repeating the same patterns. When you look at your life and say, this is just who I am, you are speaking from within a frame. And though the frame may feel safe, it is also the boundary that keeps your deeper potential locked away. To break the frame, you must first become aware of it. Begin to observe where your thoughts stop expanding. Where do you say, I can't, I'm not ready, or this isn't for me? These are the edges of your frame. The moment you encounter discomfort, resistance, or fear, that is the exact point where expansion is possible. It's not about denying those feelings, but seeing them as invitations to grow. Growth lives at the edge of resistance. We often stay within the frame because it's familiar. We know how to succeed within it. We know how to be liked, accepted, and validated. Comfort is not the same as fulfillment. You can master a small role and still feel deeply unfulfilled. Emptiness is not something to ignore. It is a signal. It is your inner being urging you to expand into new dimensions of self-expression, awareness, and purpose. Breaking the frame requires courage, not in grand gestures, but in consistent awareness. It is the courage to say, this role does define me. I will bring more to it, or I will step beyond it. It is the willingness to let go of approval in exchange for authenticity. To stop playing small, even if it means being misunderstood. The frame may crack slowly, one honest word at a time, one awakened choice after another. But eventually falls away, and what remains is not chaos, but clarity. The self that emerges from a broken frame is not fragmented. It is whole, it is powerful, it knows it does not need to fit anywhere, because it was never meant to be contained. You are not here to decorate a frame. You are here to live a life that cannot be bordered by expectations. The frame can be useful, but you must never mistake it for your home. Your true home is freedom, and freedom begins when the frame breaks. Within you exists a version untouched by titles, unaffected by opinions, and unlimited by roles. It is not something you must earn. It is already present, patiently waiting behind the noise of daily life. This true self is not built, it is remembered. But to remember it, you must first let go of the fragments that you've mistaken for your identity. These fragments come from expectations, fears, praise, criticism, small pieces you've collected over time and assembled into a version of yourself that fits into the world. The problem is not the world. The problem begins when you forget that you are more than the version you created to survive in it. To reclaim your holiness is to stop playing parts, not because the parts are unimportant, but because they are incomplete. Each role you play, whether work at home or in society, shows only one aspect of your being, but your true self is not an aspect. It is the space in which all aspects arise. When you identify only with parts, you begin to live conditionally. You become kind only when the role demands it, confident only when success validates it, peaceful only when everything outside is calm. But holiness is not conditional. It is a state of being that exists even when the roles fall away. Reclaiming your true self means making space for silence, because only in stillness can you hear what has always been there. Running through the park, beneath every achievement, behind every performance, there is a quiet presence that never changes. It watches, it feels, it experiences. While your external life may change many times, this deeper presence remains untouched. To return to it is not to become something new, to remove what is not you. It is a path of shedding, not adding. You begin by noticing the roles you are attached to. Running through the park, do they make you feel worthy? Do you who you would be without them? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary. Because anything you fear losing has power over you. The true self fears nothing. Not because it is careless, but because it knows that worth does not come from function. It comes from being. When you start to live from this place of holiness, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly treats you differently, but because you begin to treat yourself differently. You no longer chase validation because you are anchored. You no longer fear rejection because you are whole. And you no longer depend on external labels because you know who you are without them. You are not here to become someone else. You are here to remember the vastness you've always been. Let the roles serve their purpose, but never let them define you. The world see your skills, but let your heart remind you of your truth. Reclaiming your holiness is not a destination. It is a return, running the park. And once you return, you realize you were never broken, only buried. And now you rise